So hello and welcome to another episode of the Data and AI podcast. Today we're going to be talking about all things to do with data and talent. My name is Waseem Ali. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast, one of the many hosts of the podcast. I'm also the CEO of a company called Rockborne. Now, I've been a data person for about 15 years. Did my education in mathematics and statistics. I was a tennis coach for many years, and I've worked for a number of different industries as a practitioner in data, as well as a leader in data. So I'm privileged to have Dave Farmer on the show with us today. Dave is the CEO of our sister company Harnham, and I've been working with Dave for 2.5 years, and it's a real privilege to have him on the show today. I'm actually going to leave him to do the intro. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Great to be on the show. So to give you a little background to myself, I started life with a hope of being a professional tuba player. I went to music school, went to the Royal Academy of Music, came out of there in 2002 with hopes and dreams of representing the tuba on the international stage. Unfortunately, there's not many opportunities, certainly not for people who aren't as good as everyone else. And so I had to find a new niche and found a route into recruitment. Couple of years into my recruitment career, Simon, our chairman, and I started Harnham Group, and I'm the CEO of the recruitment business, as you say. Today, I'm also director of your Rockborne business, and I've been in data talent for just over 17 years now, with a responsibility for growing our business across the UK, Europe, and the US as well. To put that into context, what that means is we as a business have found over 13,000 people new jobs in just over 1,200 companies across 7 countries in that time.
I mean, that's phenomenal scale. I remember you talking to me about these stats, and I was just like, oh my God, that's incredible. I guess what fascinates me about your story, and you've got lots of stories from the early days, probably most of which you can't share on this podcast. but actually, what fascinates me is that 17 years ago, you picked an industry that probably wasn't as in or as sexy as it is today. I can't believe I actually said that, but yeah, why did you pick data? What was the rationale behind it?
So if you look at the mechanics of why a recruitment business would be successful, first of all, you need an industry where the supply doesn't meet the demand. That's where the need for people like us exists. And what we recognized was the number of students studying mathematics. I know you were one of them, but you were a dwindling number, but the demand for data roles was absolutely still there. I should say we started, interestingly, as a SaaS agency, SaaS the software, not software as a service. And obviously we've been on quite a route from that point of starting in 2006 to where we are now as a more broad data provider.
And kind of we'll talk a lot more about kind of the changes in talent that you've seen over the years as we go through the podcast. But kind of what was your motivation for starting Rockborne? You are one of the founders. You are one of the people that said, actually, we want to go after this. So after being in the recruitment space, in the talent space for 15 years, why Rockborne?
Yes, so I think it's a great question, and I think one of the best decisions we could have made was starting Rockborne, because if you look at the mandates and the conversations we were having with our clients and with the industry, obviously what we continued to see was that scarcity of talent. That the talent shortage absolutely is exactly the same, if not more than it was back in 2006 when we started the business. But also the demand for diversity in talent in that talent pool was really high. And what we recognized was that we are able to provide diverse talent, but actually by taking diverse talent from one business and moving it to another, which is it's a strategy that solves the problem for one business and creates a problem for another. So if you truly want to solve those two issues, the talent pipeline and the diversity of the industry, you can't tackle it at the mid to senior level, which was where we were operating. You have to tackle it right at the start of the industry, and you have to introduce more talent to the industry to solve the problem. And one of the things I really like about what you say in your role is if you get your role right, the makeup of the data industry and the way the data industry looks will be fundamentally different in 5 years. And that would be something I think both of us would be incredibly proud of.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I think diversity is something actually that's close to everyone in the group, in the Harnham group's heart. We talk about it a lot. It's at the forefront of everything we do. Rockborne, just for context for our listeners, is what's known in the space as an attract, train, and deploy company. We hire talented, diverse individuals into the business. We take them on a 3-month boot camp in data, based on my experience, and now it's a lot better. Now we've got coaches who run the curriculum, so they've made it a lot better, before deploying them as consultants. So it is a consultancy, a fast track consultancy for people that are new to data, and actually we're 2.5 years in. We're doing pretty well. I don't like talking about the stats because I think it makes us complacent, but there's lots of ideas on how we make the business better, and that's at the forefront, and it's around the conversation, around the board table, talking about that as well. And I think it will be a really proud moment if we in 5 years can say that we have fundamentally changed the makeup of the data industry on that side as well. So I'm really interested in kind of your experience around how the market has evolved. Diversity is certainly one element. I think more people are talking about diversity, especially more recently. There's certainly at least a page dedicated to each company around diversity and stuff. But how, from the talent side of kind of the business or the market, have you seen the market evolve from when Harnham started to where it is now?
Yeah, I think, interestingly, I was talking to one of our directors in our Amsterdam office about this last week, and he's been with the business 10 years. And so if I think about the 17 years, obviously, as I say, we started as a SaaS agency. We were finding roles for marketing analysts and credit risk analysts, and that was at the core of what we did. And we evolved as the market evolved to open up to open source technologies and all the new roles that were bolted on to the industry, recognizing that actually if we really wanted to scale this, there was much more opportunity than just working in one technology. I think one of the interesting parts of the evolution is actually a lot around the hype cycle.
Yep.
And the data industry is fantastic in its speed of growth and speed of change. But what that can lead to is technologies, roles, opportunities coming and going very quickly. I read today about the Gartner hype cycle. They've just done 25 years of their hype cycle, and it's quite interesting if you look at that in context of what we've done as a business. Cloud computing, the hype cycle around that. Who'd have thought that would just become everything we do? Big data, for a period was in every job spec. We need to focus on big data, and now it's just a given. Data scientist, 2016 to 2019 was the sexiest job title of the 21st century. I think last time I read it in 2020, it was third. But with all of these things comes a demand for talent, but also, I think, in a bigger way, actually a lack of clarity on what organizations are looking for, but also what candidates are doing, if that makes sense. I think the buzzwords, the titles, the names don't necessarily mean something to every organization, but they feel like they should be doing it. Yeah. And to give, on a really small scale, one of the examples of that, as you know, because Rockborne do the analysis, we've been producing our salary survey and our salary guide for 11 years now. And one of the big things that came in maybe 2016, if I remember right, it would be 2016, 2017, was we started to notice the number of people using the job title data scientist really spiked. But actually, if you then went through the data and looked at what they were doing, actually, you'd say, well, their title might be data scientist, but that role isn't a data scientist role. That's a marketing analyst or something else. And so, what it showed was that actually the market wasn't keeping up with the hype cycles in the way that the roles were categorized and thought about. You must have seen that from the other side as a practitioner.
I have, and it's quite interesting because when I go back to the start of my career, there were not data engineers or data scientists that existed. It was a data analyst, and that's what you were, and happy to be one as well. I mean, it wasn't, when I was doing my degree many years ago, being a data person wasn't a popular option. Everyone that did my kind of degree went into investment banking or accounting or any of those stuffs. But I was fascinated around the application of data. I mean, we would do all these theories and so on in our lectures, but I was fascinated by the statistics. So I ended up choosing a route which actually none of my other kind of friends at uni chose. I think I was the only one out of the group that I was close to that went into the data path. What's interesting now, they're all data people.
Really?
So their career has pivoted from investment banking to kind of accountancy to fewer actuaries, but they've all come back to being a data person at the kind of 10, 15 years later. So as I was saying, it was kind of, you were a data analyst, and if I go back to the roles that I did, I was doing engineering, I was building pipelines, I was thinking about how to protect the data, how to govern the data. So that's a bit of data management in there. And I was predicting, and I was doing models around it. So it was a bit of I was perhaps arguably not specialized in any of those areas, but I was doing the end to end. To that point, do you see, I mean, that's something that I feel very passionate about, especially for people that are coming early on into their careers in data, that they should get experience of end-to-end, and they should understand the end-to-end data lifecycle. I bang on about it enough in board meetings, so you're probably sick of me saying this now. But do you see that turning around again? So do you see more and more organizations from a talent side wanting more rounded skill sets, or do you feel like actually if you were to get your globe and predict forwards 5-10 years, do you think it will become even more specialized?
I think it's a good question, and I think I actually don't think they will. I think there is huge benefit in leadership positions to really understand the full life cycle as a business, but I really see companies are really almost doubling down on that, the verticalization of skill, particularly in big organizations. Of course, in small organizations, well, things are different. You know, if you have a small budget and a small data team, but within the larger organizations, we are seeing a lot more focus in, single channel data skills. But I, like you, I'm a big believer in, particularly at junior level, people learning the full data life cycle. What's your view from the other side of the fence?
I definitely think when you're kind of there's a benefit around when you're early career learning the end-to-end data lifecycle. I feel like when you don't do that, you won't appreciate the isms of stuff. I mean, one of the projects I proudly give at Rockborne as one of their first projects is a data quality project, which everyone hates doing. But the reason I give that project is based on a healthcare data set, a public healthcare data set. But the reason I give that project is so that people understand the implications of having poor quality data. So actually having poor quality diagnosis codes means your mum, let's assume it's your mum, will have the wrong treatment associated with it. And then to bring that real and bring that home is an appreciation that if you go straight into the engineering space, straight into the science space, that you won't have. And I think that appreciation really helps understand the data, end-to-end data lifecycle, but also helps with business communication. And that's fundamental. And I always kind of relate the role of a data leader to someone who can sell. And obviously that's the basis of Harnham and the recruitment business. But for me, I always say to up and coming data leaders and current data leaders that you need to be a salesperson. No one in your board or exec, or very few people, even today, will know. Let's use some of the buzzwords that you use: big data, AI. They would have heard of it. They want it. But it's up to you to communicate what it is, why it's important, and whether we should do it or not as an organisation. So I relate it to sales quite a bit, because you have to be able to communicate that.
And I think to blow your trumpet, because I know you won't do it. I watched you do a speech at an event last month in one of the events that the business runs across the globe, and you talked about a project you did within nursing data, and actually bringing the real-time data onto the iPads for community nurses. And actually, what you showed in that example was how important the business understanding was above and beyond the data. And I think actually what you touched on in what you said there, that is so pertinent, that actually understanding the data lifecycle is one thing, but you have to understand the why. What do we do as a business? And actually, one of the things I've really enjoyed in the 2.5 years we worked together, obviously you provide a huge amount of support to the recruitment business, is that you've really questioned me on why things happen, so that when you and your team are supporting and providing data, they understand the context of why we're doing something. And that's been a really important part of it.
Thank you. And I think the thing that I'm noticing a lot, having not worked in the recruitment industry and actually coming into the recruitment industry, is how much focus is put onto data, not only from a KPI and sales metric perspective, but it's rooted into every decision that you make. We'll put Rockborne aside for a second, but for Harnham as a recruitment company, like literally you're engrossed into spreadsheets and you're engrossed into the data. You could probably by heart tell me the figures for the last 12 months. You're so engrossed as a leader of that business. How important is it for a CEO to know their data and know it to the extent that you know it? Because you, like I said, you know the numbers inside out. You know the impact of it. How important is that for a leader?
See, for me, I think every leader is going to have a different answer to that question. For me, I'm a data person at heart. I need to know every number because I need to understand what's coming down the road. And, if you look at a recruitment business and the data, that I look at and from a recruitment perspective, what I am able to do based on what I look at today is predict what's coming in the future. And actually there is a flow through the data of I can, as you know, sit in a board meeting and say, well, this is what happened this month. And so I predict in 3 months, this is what's going to happen with a reasonable amount of certainty. And so I'm a big believer that as a CEO of the business, I need to understand every bit of data, which is why, I receive a number of reports every morning. And it isn't just KPIs. I think it's easy to assume it's all just KPIs, but it's the bigger picture of how is the business performing? What are we looking at? What are we doing? Trends in the market. Equally, it's understanding for us, and this is the same for you within Rockborne, is where is the demand for skills? Are we seeing any change in demand for skills? Are we seeing any trends in what our clients are asking for and looking for, so that we can stay with the market rather than falling behind? Similar to the decision to not just do SaaS all those years ago. If we'd have just stayed doing SaaS, we'd be a much smaller business now than we are.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because actually you do, I guess, to pay the compliment back, one thing you do really well at board meetings is you don't only come there to present data, you actually come with an action. And throughout my career, I've been speaking to business leaders and I've been speaking to business users around, don't only look at your data, what's the so what around it, and actually you come with, this is the trend we're seeing over the past 6 months, this is what the market's saying, and this is my recommendation of what we want to do about it. You actually create that flow through, which I've seen genuinely very, very few leaders to do, because actually they base a lot of decisions on gut. And actually even today, I mean, look, I'm a data person and I'm running Rockborne, but even my decisions are based on gut. I do use data a lot and I do want to use that to evidence stuff, but it does raise a good question around the how much do you use your gut as someone who's an expert in talent? How much do you use your gut versus how much do you look at the data, and what's the balance between them?
I'd love to say that I'm all data led and not gut led, but often I think we're all guilty as leaders of looking for data that validates your instinct, and I think we've got to be really careful as business leaders. We talk about
there's a bias.
There's a bias. I'm looking for the data that's going to allow me to show you guys on the board what I'm asking you to do or advising. So I think you've got to be really attuned to. Well, I'll let you know how I think about these things. I think about the person in the room who's going to say, right, but what about this? But what about this? And almost, you sit in meetings, try and break the theory. So if this is my instinct, I'm going to use data to break it rather than prove it. And so, in a lot of meetings, I'll talk about, right, here's the idea, here's why we're doing it. I want you to take it away for a week and break what we're thinking. Because that takes a little bit of the gut out of it. Decisions that are based on gut, if you give them a bit of time, that that gut instinct can drift, but equally you're asking everyone to prove you wrong. And if a week later we still think it's the right decision, great, we'll push forward. So hopefully that answers.
It does. And your point around kind of finding the data to kind of match what your gut's saying is actually really common, and it was a hot topic at the AI Summit, which we'll cover in a bit as a question anyway. But actually, it's a really, really hot topic around biased in data, because the reality is, whether you're a journalist or a data analyst, you're going to have a bias in some way, shape or form. And look, I unapologetically, if I'm putting a business case forwards, my analysis will be biased because I want the financial funding or whatever it may be towards it. So and a big thing that we'll see moving into this new space is how to remove that bias, or some of that bias, at least in terms of analysis or artificial intelligence. We've spoken about the buzzwords that you've seen and the things that you've changed, and it wouldn't be fair for me not to mention AI, especially because our podcast is named after it. So what's your talk about, let's say, this hype cycle of AI, and what's your take on it, and what have you heard, or from your perspective, what do you know?
So I think it's really interesting because the big thing, if you compare AI and the hype around AI now to anything we've seen before, data science, big data, etc., AI has broken into the mainstream media, and actually a lot of the noise and a lot of the conversations are driven by mainstream media. And I think if you were to not understand AI, and to your point about sit on a board and ask questions, what are we doing around AI? I've read about it in the paper. If you would assume it's something new, you would assume it's the latest thing. Yeah. We know it's been around for years. The Netflix recommender engine, what's that? 13, 14 years it's been going. Alexa, 11 years, all AI. Generative AI has moved the conversation, and it's moved the dial, but also rightly it's moved the dial on the conversation because the impact of it is huge. It's potentially huge. And so I think what we are seeing, though, similar to what we saw with data science, similar to what we saw with big data, is companies are talking about AI, but I think, you told me the other day in the analysis that you were doing with your CDO community, a high percentage of them are talking about it, but not necessarily using it in their organization. And so I think, once again, what we see is there's a lot of noise and on almost everyone assuming that everyone else has got some fantastic AI running in their organization and that they're behind the curve, whereas actually most people are talking about how they could use it. Yeah. And so again, we're seeing new job titles come up. We're seeing a demand for skills that are they necessary, or is it we feel like we need this to not stay behind, or not fall behind, excuse me. But again, I would say the biggest difference is that because it's hit the mainstream media, I know that the conversation in a number of businesses is, what are we doing around artificial intelligence? And I do think that's different to the previous hype we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kind of valid points, especially your point around AI has been around for a while. I mean, arguably, it's kind of since the 1950s it's been around.
Yeah.
And we've been and it is, as you say, the generative AI aspect that's hit mainstream media and actually created a lot of buzz around the board tables in organizations and so on and so forth. And I think from the conversations that I've been having with CIOs, CDOs and organizations, the biggest challenge for them at the moment is how to control the hype or control the buzz and actually just take stock in what does this actually mean for that business and what are the risks around it as well. And that kind of leads us quite nicely into the next topic around trends and what you see happening. So where do you see AI going? We're fresh off the back of the AI summit. There was obviously some key outcomes. It was all surprise around risk and regulation and so on.
Yeah. I think if we look at the summit specifically, you're right. Most of the conversation is around regulation, and I think that is exactly the right conversation, and it's happening. The right people, I believe, are having the right conversations about regulation. But if you read the attendee list, I read it with interest because it's, of course, big tech holds the knowledge of our AI capability, but I'm interested to watch the amount of influence big tech will hold over that regulation that is necessary, because the potential impact of that policy and the policy that is introduced and regulation that is introduced could be to limit others' ability to really impact the space. And so I think there's an interesting time coming up with that regulation coming in.
So really interesting answer around the summit. I was watching. I was desperate for a ticket for it, but unfortunately, you couldn't get me one, Dave. So, I was watching with interest around kind of obviously Elon Musk coming and the big players from AWS etc. coming down to it as well as government bodies and I'm almost in two headspaces here. One headspace is regulation and the risk around AI is extremely important from a safeguarding use of data perspective. I mean, even children, right? Safeguarding children perspective. It's so critical that it's handled in the right way, and in a way, it's right to be government led. But at the same time, I come back to my background. So I started my career in healthcare. I come back to the space of if there's a model created in AI that helps predict early detection in cancer or some actually life-threatening diseases, what's the balance between the regulation and ethics side of all of it? So will policies around allow innovation to move fast enough in those spaces versus kind of bringing the governance? I mean, that's probably a whole new topic altogether. But are you seeing, from a talent perspective, more roles around kind of AI from a practitioner perspective or security perspective? What are you seeing in this space?
For us, I think if we look at innovation versus regulation, we're seeing more roles in the innovation space than we are in the regulation space so far. I think one of the really interesting things we've seen job titles, AI engineer. Again, new job titles, something that didn't exist. I think if you were to really look, it probably would have been a data engineer or a data scientist in the past. Yep. And again, that's good. That's evolution. You know, we have to evolve and we have to innovate. But sometimes it's a rebadging of an old skill. I would say, though, to your point on innovation versus regulation, we are seeing more roles on that side. However, I do think there will be a shift, and then there needs to be. Yep. If we look at the capability of generative AI, there needs to be a shift in the number of roles in regulation. And I think I think it's a fascinating point. It really is true. You don't want to over-regulate to the point that you hamper progress, but there has to be pretty strict guide rails in place of how this can be used. So I think we're both in agreement on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's an ethics piece around the use of data and look, there's from an innovation side, maybe a little bit flippant, but there's a handful of players, the big tech players, that will absolutely drive that. There will be boutique data science organizations, AI organizations that exist today that are doing phenomenal stuff, and actually I think they'll get swept up by the bigger players, and I do think that's as part of the offering that comes with your Microsofts, your Amazons, your Googles of the world. So I think it's a really interesting space to be in. The key for me that came out of the summit was the role that government had to play, and we know that there was a declaration signed by a number of countries around the risks related to artificial intelligence and stuff. If we kind of flip that to a talent perspective, what role do you think the government, public sector organisations, universities even, have to play in order to, I guess, equip or almost get ready the next generation of individuals coming into their careers with skills around data, AI, all of these things? What role do you think they have to play?
It's interesting. It's not that long ago that the policy of extending the age at which you studied maths was proposed by the government. Now, I think that would have a positive impact in terms of the potential skills to the industry. I don't necessarily agree with it as an approach, though. And so I'll tackle the university piece first, and I say this as someone with a music degree who now, other than to de-stress after board meetings with you, I play the piano. Other than that, my music doesn't really play much of a part. I went through my entire education system fully focused on one outcome, which was to be a musician, completely missing that actually the skills I was developing, the training I was being given was really useful to another career. And I reflect on this a lot. And, I talk a lot about, I would love to go back to where I studied and say, hey, you should talk to your students about the fact that, look at me, I was one of, I think when I was there, 8 tuba players studying in that one college, where there's 6 jobs in the country. And one of them was held by my teacher, one was held by my previous teacher. They weren't talking to us about they weren't talking to us about what else we could do. And that's because they had a remit which was to prepare musicians. So there's a bit of a conflict there, right? They are giving us skills that are really useful, but not talking about it. I credit my education with a huge part of my ability to do my role now, but they don't think about it in the same way. So if we touch on that degree point, I look at, obviously Sam and Jonah are our children. Sam's a bit older than Jonah. When they get to university, will degrees have the same credibility?
Yep.
They're expensive. If you look at the example of Exeter Uni and their magic degree, how useful is that to any kind of career? I don't know. Forgive me. I haven't read the syllabus in great detail, but I can't imagine that it's too useful. We need to be thinking about new routes into data. I was at a diversity event that we ran in Amsterdam last week, and discussion around challenges of bringing people into the market. And one of the examples of someone who was in a senior data role, she said she was successful because she doesn't have a maths background. She doesn't have the standard, the normal background that someone would have. She worked for an organization who took an opportunity on her retraining and reskilling. So I look at the work that Rockborne's doing, taking people and reskilling them into fantastic data consultants. As you know, you train them and you work with them, and I get to work with them. And so I think from a university perspective, they have to do something, or they run the risk of not really being as relevant anymore.
So thank you for that. I couldn't agree more on your university point, and especially with a young boy gonna hit the education system, and what is he gonna do next? It's a constant conversation, even though he's only 20 months. It's a constant conversation in our house. And look, I did a maths degree, and I started off by doing pure maths in university. To very quickly realise that I was more interested in statistics and the application of it, and I almost kind of shied away from kind of lecturers who are all brilliant in their own way, but almost kind of winking at us and saying this is a proof that's come up in every exam, or this is a theorem that's come up in every exam, and I didn't feel like I was learning anything off the back of it. So I ended up majoring in statistics because I was really interested in the application. But what I found, similar to your kind of music background, I actually found that outside of kind of the degree that I learned in the topic that I'm in, I picked up a lot from coaching, and actually a big part of what's made me a goodish data person is the ability to communicate with a bunch of different people, which my degree didn't teach me, and the application of that they didn't teach me. But I realized how important that was when I got into consulting and I started going down going up the leadership ladder almost in data, where actually the ability to talk to someone in a way that they understand without coming across as arrogant or patronizing, but just explaining it to them in the way that they would get it, was a skill that I picked up from tennis coaching, believe it or not. And I was never a great player, but I had an ability to teach, and that's something that holds really true to me in how I lead as well. And that kind of leads me actually really nicely onto the next point around kind of leadership styles and stuff. So my previous guest on the podcast that I hosted was David Reed, who's from our friends at Data IQ, and he's their Chief Knowledge Officer. And one thing that I started was asking every guest that I have, what is a question that you want to ask to the next guest? And you don't know who the next guest is going to be. I do that so they keep inviting me to host the next podcast. So I do that as a way of sticking true. Yeah, so I'm pretty smart in that sense. So David Rees actually asked about a leadership motivation, and his question was, how do you do it, and what keeps you motivated? So how would you answer that question?
That's a really good question. I think for me, if I look at the why, I am lucky, having, as I say, fallen into my career in recruitment. I'm lucky to have a job that, on the most part, I absolutely love, and it is really challenging. You know, the market is challenging for everyone right now, but I look at what motivates me and what keeps me going is talent. And put simply, I'm a big believer in graduate talent. You know, if you look at our model at Harnham is an organic model, and so I referenced a director in our Netherlands business. He joined us as a graduate 11 years ago, and he's one of many that I can point to right the way through the business who might have been with us 2 years, 5 years, 11 years, that joined us as a graduate. And so I'm a big believer in creating opportunities for people to thrive and do amazing things. And my role as custodian of the business is really just to give them the opportunity to do what they do and stay out of their way and just keep them on the right path. And so what keeps me going is actually the challenge they give me, the way they work and what they do, and really trying to keep them facing in the right direction and motivated is what keeps me going.
Fantastic. And yeah, just to echo that, our director of growth at Rockborne is someone who's been with Harnham since the beginning as well. So yeah, it's a great model. And I've never been in an industry where, I said this to you, I think on day 2 or something, I've never been in an industry or a company where you've got such a long kind of retention rate in organizations. People you're really focusing on their development. There's a lot going into L&D, and actually we've actually unapologetically stolen some of those things in Rockborne to build that into our training program as well. We're coming up to time, and the time's gone way too fast on this, but I'd like to ask you a couple more questions before we wrap up. So I'm really interested as the CEO of one of the largest data and AI recruitment companies out there. What do you see happening? The 3 things that you see happening over the next 3 years in data, talent, AI, all of that kind of stuff. If you were to whittle it down to 3, what would it be?
I think a couple of things. First of all, we've talked about AI the hype cycle will continue. This will be one that continues. And I think it needs to move from where it is right now into BAU. We understand its power, we understand how to use it, and more importantly, we regulate that use so that it becomes BAU. Secondly, David Reed mentioned it on the podcast with you recently about improving data literacy within organizations. And I think that's going to be a big trend. It's really important as we've seen AI and data be more prevalent in wider conversation. Actually, companies need to improve what they're doing and really need to consider their policies and the literacy of their organization. So that's great to see, and I do believe that will be a change. And finally, the industry is taking steps in the right direction of diversity, and I think they will continue to do that. There are some phenomenal organizations doing work to improve diversity in the organization. I would put Rockborne and your organization as part of that. It was great in amongst our peers within those diversity-led organizations in data that Rockborne was recognized as a diversity champion within the Data IQ Awards. So I feel incredibly privileged to work with you and the team on what you're doing within Rockborne.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, look, it was I think winning awards at things like Data IQ, which is it's a very different award system. It's not like you buy a table when you win an award or anything like that. It's actually thought about by data leaders. Data leaders from across the industry are coming together and deciding who wins an award in each category. And what made me feel so proud was it was great to get up on the stage and take the award. But as you know, I'm a little bit socially awkward, so I feel really awkward about stuff like that. But I felt really proud because of the organisations that were in the shortlist and the genuine struggle that the judges had in choosing who should win that award. And absolutely privileged to win the award this year. I hope someone else wins it next year, so they help us step our game up even more as part of that as well. And look, final question, and hopefully you've guessed this because I asked you David's question. What would be again, because they invite me to be a host on the next one. So what would be your question for my next guest? You don't know who it is. It could be a data leader. It could be anyone. What would be your question to them?
I think understanding where AI sits in their organization. So where does AI sit in your organization would be good to understand. And no matter who they are, I think they're going to have an interesting take on that.
That's a phenomenal question, and I think it's a really, really hot topic at the moment as well. And I don't think anyone's got the answer to that. So I'd love to put that to our next guest as well. Dave, it's been so good having you on the show today. I feel privileged talking to you and spending this time with you as well. You have to promise us you'll come back maybe in the next.
It's taken you quite a long time to get me on once.
Yeah, so we'll get it booked in now. Yeah, we'll start getting it booked in for next year now. But it will be great to continue this conversation as things develop as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode, brought to you by the Harnham Group. We'd love it if you would share the podcast on social media and leave a comment or a review to help us reach a bigger audience. If your company is having difficulty finding skilled data professionals, you can rely on the global leader in data and analytics recruitment, staffing and talent development to assist you with your hiring needs. Find out more at www.harnham.com. Thank you for listening.